Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and the what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers stop and ID laws, extending Terry stops, and reasonable suspicion, and is brought to us by King Black News and Visuals' channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. On February 28, 2023, several officers with the Newark Police Department stopped the owner of the King Black News and Visuals' YouTube channel, who we will refer to as Mr. KB, on the street in Newark, New Jersey after receiving a 911 call alleging that a man fitting Mr. KB's description was walking around with a gun. As officers approach Mr. KB, he begins to record the interaction.
What's going on? Work with the city of Newark, man. Kick rocks, keep it pushing. I don't know why you stopping me. I'm working right now. I'm work for the city of Newark. You keep it pushing, you're wasting your time.
You ID on you?
Yeah, I'm ID on it.
Where you working?
We're with the city of Newark.
City of Newark.
Yeah, what you mean what it mean? I'm under the official duties working. You stopping me, you don't have reasonable suspicion of a crime. Make sure you put your body cameras on. Alright, making sure. Yeah, you don't have no reasonable suspicion of a crime to stop me. And I just told you I was working. And my ID in my ID in the truck. You can't stop me just for having this stuff on, man. Seriously. I'm telling you, man, y'all playing with the wrong one. Huh? No, I'm looking for something. That's why y'all stopped me from doing what I gotta do. I'm looking for something. I'm looking for my guardian angel. Like, man, I had dropped it out here. But y'all stopped me like I'm a terrorist, bro. That's what I'm saying. I don't appreciate that, man. Am I free to leave? Yes or no, sir? Mr. Cardio, what's your badge number? Alright, what's your reason for stopping me, sir? I ain't, no, don't talk to me that way. You disrespecting me. Don't tell me to be quiet.
Because we stopped you, now we have to do a FI. We have to do a stop report.
I already identified myself by telling you that I work for the sanitation.
What's your name?
I'm not required by state law
How is that identified?
or New Jersey statute or United States Constitution to give you my name. I already told you that I work for the city, and I already told you I work for sanitation. That's enough.
The officers inform Mr. KB that he needs to identify himself, but Mr. KB claims that he's not required to identify himself under state or federal law. Although it is well established that an officer may ask a suspect to identify himself during a Terry stop, individuals do not have a legal obligation to do so unless state law requires it. Now, because New Jersey is not a stop and ID state, New Jersey police officers typically do not have the authority to demand that an individual identify themselves outside of a traffic stop unless they're making an arrest or issuing a summons. As such, courts have generally concluded that refusing to identify when there is no legal obligation to do so does not constitute obstruction under New Jersey law. Section 2C 29-1 of the New Jersey Revised Statutes, which codifies the obstruction statute, states that, quote, a person commits an offense if he purposely obstructs, impairs, or perverts the administration of law or other governmental function, or prevents or attempts to prevent a public servant from lawfully performing an official function by means of flight, intimidation, force, violence, or physical interference or obstacle, or by means of any independently unlawful act. In the 1985 case of State versus Pearlstein, the Superior Court of New Jersey Appellate Division held that the statute, quote, is limited to situations where there is violent or physical interference, or where other acts occur which are unlawful independently of the purpose to obstruct government. Based in part on this decision, the same court concluded in the 2005 case of State versus Camillo that the failure to identify alone is insufficient for obstruction, and that an individual's refusal to provide his name, date of birth, and social security number to a state trooper who needed the information to prepare an incident report did not constitute obstruction, noting that obstruction must be carried out, quote, by means of flight, intimidation, force, violence, or physical interference or obstacle, or by means of any independently unlawful act. Based on this precedent, it is unlikely that a court would determine that Mr. KB committed obstruction by refusing to identify himself.
Yeah, let me call my supervisor, and you can call your supervisor.
Because you about to escalate, we're not about to do this.
Escalate what? You're being recorded. You're being recorded.
We're trying to send you on your way.
Yeah, I already asked to be sent on my way, and you sitting here telling me that I'm being detained. You put me through an unlawful detention. I don't care about none of that stuff you're talking about. I'm still sitting here. You still never tell me if I'm not free to leave.
You're not.
Well, you're not getting an ID. So what are you talking about?
Then you know what?
None of you guys intimidate me. I'm just letting you know. I'm very calm, very cordial. I'm asking you again. Am I free to leave? Yes or no? All right. What crime am I being investigated for?
We got a call, right, for a male fitting your exact description, wearing a book bag, wearing a walkie-talkie with a tactical.
That's fine.
Right?
That's fine.
Okay. Then they said that they believe that you had a weapon. We did not approach you. We didn't come at you crazy. Came at you respectful, right? Now, all we're trying to tell you literally is, okay, right? Our suspicion is dispelled, but we still need to identify the person we are speaking with.
The officer claims that even though their suspicion has been dispelled, they still need to identify Mr. KB for their report and continue to detain him. As we've discussed many times here on ATA, officers have the authority to detain individuals when they have a reasonable suspicion to believe that they are engaged in criminal activity. However, in the 1983 case of Florida versus Royer, the U.S. Supreme Court clarified that, quote, an investigative detention must be temporary and last no longer than is necessary to effectuate the purpose of the stop. And that, now quoting again, the investigative methods employed should be the least intrusive means reasonably available to verify or dispel the officer's suspicion in a short period of time. Relying in part on this case, the Supreme Court of New Jersey held in the 2019 case of State versus Chisholm that officers violated the Fourth Amendment when they continued to detain the occupants of a motel room to identify them after the noise violation that was the basis of the original detention was remedied, and the officers decided not to issue any summonses, noting that, quote, a seizure that is lawful at its inception can violate the Fourth Amendment if its manner of execution unreasonably infringes interest protected by the Constitution. The court concluded that, now quoting again, because the officers exercised their own discretion and declined to issue a summons for a noise violation, they essentially concluded that the occupants were not engaging in any criminal activity, and that, quote, after the loud music was abated and the police chose not to issue a summons, submitting warrant checks was unnecessary and improper because doing so would do nothing to help confirm or undermine the police officer's decision regarding the noise complaint. In this instance, the officers had likewise concluded that Mr. KB was not engaging in any criminal activity, and, applying the logic of the New Jersey Supreme Court in the Chisholm case, identifying him would do nothing to help the officer's decision regarding the 911 call involving a man carrying a firearm. As we mentioned earlier in this episode, an individual's mere refusal to identify themselves during a Terry stop is not a crime in New Jersey, even if officers may need the information to complete their reports. Therefore, a court would likely conclude that the officers had no independent reasonable suspicion to prolong Mr. KB's detention once their initial suspicions were dispelled, and that their actions in doing so violated the Fourth Amendment.
Nah, I'm willing to identify myself if I had committed a crime. That's what I'm saying.
So now,
so under no circumstances, I'm not giving you my ID. I can do.
Had to have committed a crime in order for us to identify.
Nah, you don't know what you're talking about. You got it. Go. You need to read the.
We got a call with somebody matching.
Man, you about to get in a lot of trouble if you believe that. You know, police about to have more lawsuits and more federal. Y'all about to be under a federal investigation. If you really believe that you can stop people without having an articulable suspicion of a crime, reasonable articulable suspicion of a crime.
The fact that we got a call, someone fitting your exact description.
It could be all done. You just give me a name.
It really could, man.
No, you don't need to ID me.
You don't have to provide me.
I've been doing this for 15 years. I don't give nobody no IDs. That's just what it is. It could be corny, man, but I know my rights. Say what you want to say, bro. I ain't got to give you no ID. That's it. 1,051 hours. Supervisor rising on scene. So I don't know what's going on.
The reason they stopped you is because we did get a 911 call saying somebody matching your description was walking around with a handgun.
Even still, once you stop me and you investigate, you see that, you know what I mean, I ain't got no gun.
So
I mean,
exactly. So that's where we at the point right now, right? We see you don't have no weapons, so you're gonna be on your way. However, because you were detained,
I could get if I want to, I can get like the police report or transcripts for that.
Yeah, we'll give you a VIN number. However, we're gonna need your identification because you were stopped.
Sergeant Vasquez informs Mr. KB that the officers stopped him because they received a 911 call about someone who matched his description walking around with a handgun. Section 2C 39-5 of the New Jersey Revised Statute states that, quote, any person who knowingly has in his possession any handgun without first having obtained a permit to carry is guilty of a crime of the second degree. Additionally, under Section 2C 39-2 of the New Jersey Revised Statutes, quote, when the legality of a person's conduct depends on his possession of a permit, it shall be presumed that he does not possess such a permit until he establishes the contrary. Accordingly, when officers have reasonable suspicion that an individual is in possession of a firearm, they are generally authorized to detain them to investigate further. Now, it is important to note that reasonable suspicion suspicion only needs to be articulable, meaning that it must be capable of being expressed, explained, or justified. But it does not need to be actually articulated during the stop, and therefore, officers are not required to explain their reasonable suspicion to detainees. Nonetheless, officers must maintain reasonable suspicion throughout Terry stops, even if they do not choose to communicate their suspicions to the citizens being detained. In the 2000 case of Florida versus JL, the Supreme Court held that an anonymous tip that an individual is carrying a gun is, without more, insufficient to justify a Terry stop, despite the fact that the officers in the case found an individual matching the tipster's description at the location provided in the anonymous call. In reaching this conclusion, the court reasoned that, quote, all the police had to go on in this case was the bare report of an unknown, unaccountable informant who neither explained how he knew about the gun nor supplied any basis for believing he had inside information, and that, now quoting again, an accurate description of a subject's readily observable location and appearance does not show that the tipster has knowledge of concealed criminal activity. However, in the 2014 case of State versus Smith, the Appellate Division of the Superior Court of New Jersey determined that law enforcement had reasonable suspicion to stop a vehicle based on an identified citizen's report to police that she had seen the vehicle's occupant flash a handgun. Now, in reaching this conclusion, the court recognized that because, quote, a report by a concerned citizen or a known person is not viewed with the same degree of suspicion that applies to a tip by an anonymous informant, and also, now quoting again, by giving her name and any additional identifying information collected by the 911 system, an identified citizen is subject to future questioning and possible prosecution if the information provided is false. An ordinary citizen is, quote, presumed to be providing reliable information, and further investigation of the citizen's reliability is not required before appropriate police action is taken. In the situation involving Mr. KB, if the 911 caller making the report claimed to have actually seen someone carrying a gun, or otherwise explained how they knew about the gun, well, it seems likely that a court would conclude that the officers had reasonable suspicion to detain Mr. KB, particularly if the caller provided their name or other corroborating details. However, additional facts, such as if the caller was anonymous or did not claim to have personally observed an individual matching Mr. KB's description brandishing or openly carrying a firearm, could impact the court's decision.
Oh, no, you're not getting ID. My supervisor's coming right now. You're not getting my ID because I didn't commit a crime.
You're right, but they had reason.
All right, hold on. One second.
So they stopped you for that reason.
That's a
We're
lie.
asking for your identification is because you were lawfully detained because they believed that you committed a crime because somebody called saying you was walking
You
around
can
with a
believe
weapon.
what you want to believe.
Right.
If
But that's
once
why
you come and
stopped.
investigate and you see that I haven't committed a crime, you let me go. That's how that go. I know I am right. They're telling me, hit this guy, tell me I'm not right. I know, I've been free to go for the last 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
But if you want to give your identification, then you're not giving your identification. We'll take it from there. All right, so no stop, right?
Yeah, there is no stop. You know that from the jump. I'm not giving nobody no hard time, bro.
I told you we were just trying to follow protocol, man. That's it.
I'm gonna tell my supervisor he ain't gotta come. Sergeant Vasquez said I'm free to leave, so you don't have to come here, but I'm about to walk up Grafton, meet Ellison, do the boxes. I can't even finish looking for my stuff now.
After continuing to detain him for several minutes, the officers eventually told Mr. KB that he was free to leave, and he walked away without further incident. Mr. KB was not charged with any crime or issued a citation, and it's unknown whether he intends to file a complaint or pursue legal action against the officers for their actions during the interaction. Overall, the Newark officers get a C, because although they maintained mostly professional demeanors and did not use physical force or arrest Mr. KB, they extended his detention after their initial suspicions had been dispelled without reasonable suspicion of an additional crime, and repeatedly ordered that he identify himself when he was not legally obligated to do so. Throughout the encounter, the officers appeared to be more concerned with completing their paperwork than respecting Mr. KB's constitutional rights. And although they eventually let him leave without identifying himself, they kept him detained for an extended period of time while they attempted to manipulate him into complying with their unfounded demand for identification. While it is certainly possible that the Newark Police Department encourages or even requires officers to identify the subjects of Terry stops, even official department policies cannot override the constitutional rights of citizens. This is a trap that members of law enforcement fall into all too often, and I would encourage law enforcement officers to remember that both both state law and the Constitution trump any standard operating procedures that their department might have in place, or their need to complete department paperwork. Mr. KB gets a B+, because although he demonstrated some confusion in his understanding of reasonable suspicion and did not exercise his right to remain silent, he stood firm in his refusal to identify himself throughout the illegal extension of his detention and requested a supervisor to help resolve this situation. That being said, Mr. KB repeatedly argued that the officers did not have the reasonable suspicion necessary to legally detain him because he had not committed a crime. And although the distinction might seem subtle, it is essential that citizens and auditors alike understand that courts determine whether officers had reasonable suspicion based on the officer's knowledge at the time of the detention. In this situation, the officers likely did have reasonable suspicion when they originally detained Mr. KB, even though he had not committed a crime and did not provide him with a full explanation of the 911 call. And it's important for individuals to remember that officers may have the legal grounds necessary to detain them based on information that is not known to them at the time. Now, in the description of the original video, Mr. KB gave himself a grade of B-. And while he obviously assigned himself a lower grade than I gave him, I want to commend Mr. KB for his commitment to self-assessment and his willingness to share an interaction that he did not believe to be his best work in an effort to help educate and inform the community at large. Moving forward, I would encourage Mr. KB to continue to study the applicable constitutional and state laws, and remember in future encounters that officers may have reasonable suspicion, even if he has not committed a crime. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic that you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out my second channel for even more police interaction content.